Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion, any questions that you have about media or virtual production. And the second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about our future, about our futures of Thursdays. We're going to be discussing what kind of artists and creatives we'd like to bring in to interview. And so that's what we talk about in the second hour. Of course, tomorrow we'll talk about more nuts and bolts of what that looks like. And then on Saturday, of course, is education. We're doing something a little different with education this week or this year, is that we will have the 2 hours of discussion, which aren't on YouTube, and then an hour of technical talk. We're going to talk about Keynote. So stay tuned for that. And let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. The first one this morning comes from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He says, for slides viewed on Zoom, do you prefer serif or sans serif type? For slides viewed on a projection, do you prefer serif or sans serif? And any other font principles for readability?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, my preference is sans serif fonts on both platforms. I find them difficult to read and difficult to render properly. They're great for print.
Yeah, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And the sans serif is easier for the computer to render that shape out. You start adding a serif to it, then you have areas where things get a little grungy, and then it gets really bad.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I agree 100%. However, I do notice that as screen resolutions get higher and higher, we have more of the capability of rendering things like the serifs, which I guess were designed originally to make things a little easier to read, make the letter forms a little more distinct between L's and ones and I's and things like that. So as it gets better and better in terms of resolution, that should get improve things. I will note also that you asked for other font principles. The distinct contrast between your background and your type can be one of the most important things, in my opinion, because we're working in video, and as the background changes, if you have dark lettering and the background changes from light to dark because of a camera move or something, you often want to find some way to separate that type out of the screen. So those are some principles.
There's probably a whole second hour on using type with let's talk about that. Someone put that into the second hour suggestions. I'll try to write it down as well. Go ahead, David.
And the only sans font that should be eliminated at all costs is Comic. Comic Sans font should just be eliminated from all typefaces.
Have you seen this? You've seen the Avatar, the Saturday Night Live thing about Avatar's font. Yeah, if you haven't, just search Avatar font Saturday Night Live. It's classic. Anyway, the other thing is that from a branding perspective, sans serif or serif fonts in a broadcast is not considered quote unquote vogue. So I mean, no one uses them very much, and if you do on a presentation, it definitely dates you. So I would say beyond just the readability, I would never use a serif font unless I was doing tight text. I mean, the sans serif is what is designed for. And you shouldn't be putting typed text into a presentation. If you are, there's a whole other conversation we can have about that. So I think serif was really designed for display text, which hopefully is what you're using for a presentation. Next question.
Moving on, we have John Snyder in Reno, Nevada next. He says, the special racing event yesterday was fantastic. What makes for an effective one-to-one virtual interview?
Go ahead, Bill.
My number one thing is a good interviewer, and I think Alex did an extraordinarily good job yesterday. That's part of why the thing went so well. Obviously, he was very prepared, had a ready question to keep the conversation moving along, and was able to react when it took a slight turn maybe that he wanted to follow up on. It's really a human interaction, and the person doing the interview has to be experienced, I think, to pull off a really good interview. It's not random.
Go ahead, Rupert.
In a virtual situation, I mean, of course, the whole thing is going to be built on top of good audio and good video and good connection. You've got to have a good pipeline between those two people for even anything to work. So the usual basics are essential there to even get out of the gate. But then, obviously, an interesting guest that's good, and a good host or a good interviewer and an interesting audience. I think I think you then flow into a kind of decision tree and some judgment factors over whether it is live, whether it's pre-record. Whether you are working with a kind of predefined narrative or whether you're taking live questions, and whether you're working in any boundaries of competencies or just subjects that you can tackle or that you can't. whether it's recorded or whether it's going to be broadcast later, taking those things into account. As for just general interview technique and that, I think referring back to the Michael Krasny second hour would be a good kind of complement to the topic also.
Absolutely. Nigel?
Yeah, great session. I think the most important thing, whether it's virtual, whether it's real, however it is when the interviewer actually wants to listen and understand what the person has to say and to make that person successful. We're so used to watching interviews on television nowadays where the interviewer is more impressed with themselves than their guest, and it's a very unsatisfying experience for the audience. So 2 ears, 1 mouth, if you're not using them in that proportion, you're not doing a good interview, I think.
Yeah, I think that the advantage for yesterday's discussion is that I've known Sam for a long time now, and we spent a lot of time talking about it, but not in as much detail as we talked about it yesterday. So there were still lots of new things for me, but enough knowledge of what was being discussed to kind of look for certain things that I was looking for. And what really made the interview great, in my opinion, was all the questions coming in from everyone watching. Using mukhana as part of a meeting was not something we've done in the past, and it was extremely effective. That's the best thing about the interview was, I was fine to doing at least the intro, but what really made it difference is all of us. And I still keep on coming back to the fact that this group way of interviewing people is super effective, because it's just, there's so many different views of the same thing that are asking questions that I think we get something really effective. So I think that the number one thing that made it good was mukhana and the producers that were watching. Next question.
The next one comes up from Noah Sargent in Fullerton, California. He says, what other office hours groups or shows are you interested in? Cooking, woodworking, bird watching, whatever, and so forth.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I guess, to be honest, I'm interested in them all. Some of the subject matters may not be in my wheelhouse, but the interest in just seeing all these things come together and all the collaboration and the teamwork and just the ideas and the discussion, I think I think we're just a generally curious group. So that a lot of those things probably, I think maybe a lot of people are in the same boat, but it's all interesting seeing how this stuff's coming together.
Yeah, Sky.
So, Mr. Prado, check me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's an event that's going to be happening on March 19th of 2022. And that concept of a bunch of people coming together to create an event that could also be helpful for science and could be helpful for inspiration and to Rupert's point, community building. I think John's going to light up a rocket. And Chris Fenwick also brought a concept into the idea that it's not necessarily about, he looks around, who's Chris Fenwick, but the concept of the community coming together is a part of the celebration. So that's an event that's coming up that I'm very excited about.
Jesse?
Builders, especially prop makers in their shops, showing the process and the workflow.
Yeah, David? Nope, can't hear you, David.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. I have a friend who's a DJ. They've done rock and roll interview show, and I've like to propose that. I also admin the Facebook group that's about 1,500 strong for that same community. So talk after hours.
To do I'm sorry, what is he? Is he interviewing rock and roll, or is he?
She's a DJ on a local independent radio station here. Right. She has a lot of connections in the industry. I've actually shot a few pilots. The concept of the show is just a one-on-one interview called Rockers for Life. The original one was they were sitting in rocking chairs while doing the interview, and but it won't work in COVID times. But I've got like four pilot episodes kind of in the can from 3 years ago.
That's great. Yeah, no, that would be great. Nigel?
I'd like to see more stuff on composition, digital effects, and stuff using some of the tools that you guys talk about all the time that most of us are really beginners to, that we could play along with. By the way, the problem with the woodworking one is I cannot do other things while that's on. I find myself completely entranced in someone transforming something like that. It was quite disruptive to my day because I watched it for like 3 hours.
I have that with almost anything, creating something from a raw state to a finished state. Watching sculptors work in Zimbabwe, I had the same problem where I knew it was going to take 4 hours, and I still just sat there and watched. Like they're just watching every piece of that come together. Next question.
Next one comes to us again from Rupert McRae. This time the question is, the BBC's World Business Report has reported on the low turnout at CES. What other reliable reports of attendance has anyone seen from CES, either from in-person or digital?
Ari?
Well, from a different perspective, I have a friend who builds booths, the very large type of booth, and he ships them out. And he said that from what he's hearing from clients and he's seen himself, attendance is great, and they're all excited to be there. So that's one report.
Yeah, most of the reports are 20 to 30% of the attendance 2 years ago. So I think that's so it may be a lot of people wherever that booth is, but the actual attendance seems to be about 20 to 30% of the normal size. Of course, last year doesn't count because it was virtual. So it'll be interesting to see, a lot of companies I think are going to look at what their results are. A lot of them look at literally how much press do they get, how many people, how many eyeballs did they reach across that. If they reach something anywhere near what they normally reach in the press without having an attendance at CES, it could be a pretty rough time for the conference, because that's what we're hearing a lot of from other vendors with IBC and NAB. They're like, well, sales and press and all the metrics that we pay attention to are staying the same, and so we're not, certain that the conferences are really creating any uptick for us. So that's a lot of narratives that we're hearing from the vendors, is just not sure whether they're getting anything out of it, and they may never have been getting as much out of it as they thought. Next question.
Our next question submitter is Gabriel Ung in Malaysia, and he says, I've been asked for live translation subtitles into Zoom's meeting or webinar. What are AI-based or live human translation services the panel has used that they can recommend? Thanks.
I go with Rupert.
I'll speak to the automated side. There's things like Otter AI that you can integrate with Zoom, and I think there's some other ones popping up with integrations in the Zoom app marketplace. But as with many other things, Zoom themselves are working on solutions in this area too. Again, for the live translation transcription side, on the automatic side. Just with that though, with the automatic side, you've always got to bear in mind that margin of error and interpretation and things like that. But if you need the accuracy, then you probably need to go the human route.
Yeah, Microsoft in their Skype for Business has been working on this, and they will seamlessly manage like 60 languages, relatively effectively, where you can just say, this is my local language, and it'll start to put those out as and Google does it as well inside of Meet. I think Zoom is a little behind in that area, where they're not doing as much of it or making it as seamless. From the real problem you get into is poor audio. It gets back to what we usually talk about. Poor audio. Poor audio turns out to be if you're doing automated, you're doing regular translation or interpretation, it's a problem. But if you're doing automated, it's a really big problem. So poor audio and heavy accents are very, very hard to parse for the system. And so you want to have, if you're going to have a computer do it, and there's actually a whole industry called respeaking. So respeaking is basically what they do is they literally listen to your poor audio, and then in a nice environment with a good microphone, they just re-speak it, and they speak it into the AI. They've been trained to talk into the AI. They've also learned to listen and speak the same words back out again. So they're literally just taking bad diction, bad whatever, and putting it into a clean environment and handing it back to the AI. And that is it's very popular in Australia, because Australia has a lot of requirements around. And I can't remember who bought AI Media, but AI Media was the company that was doing a lot of these things, because every classroom has to have this and everything else in Australia. And so it built up very quickly. But respeaking takes about 1/10 the time to train someone, less than a stenographer. So that's why it's really popular. So it can be done, but you need to have good diction and good audio. Now, most of what we do is all with actual humans, and there's 2 humans involved typically. One human being the person who's doing the translation, and the other one actually is typically a stenographer. The stenographer cannot translate and type at the same time. Like it's just that's not a viable thing. So what they do is you have someone literally just speaking it to them in the language that they need to do, and then they just type in that language. You also have to remember that certain languages are not really available for subtitling. So you need to use AI. So for instance, we have a lot of trouble with Hindi, Mandarin, a variety of those because there's no way to do that. The way that the notes work and everything else. And so you can't oftentimes get live translation in those with a human, with a stenographer, but you can with AI. And so AI will generate that. But again, diction and audio quality become super important. Go ahead, Chris.
I would imagine that there's some serious psychological problems for people that have to do that respeak thing. I mean, I would find that to be really weird.
They talk about it. They talk about it like circular breathing. That you're just, like literally you're circular breathing, but with words, and it's it's a skill that you can definitely do where you just lower the latency down, and you can make it sound like you're talking at the same time with somebody else. Because what you're really doing is you're toning off of the very beginning of the words, and your brain is filling the word in very, very quickly and putting it together. But it's a thing. Yeah.
Interesting people in the world, aren't there?
Yeah, exactly. I did talk to one respeaker, and they said it's kind of like you're possessed and speaking in tongues when you're doing it for a long period of time. It's just like because you're just flowing something out that isn't you.
I could imagine what if you got yourself into a topic where it's all of a sudden it's like, I don't like what I'm saying.
Right, exactly. Exactly, Bill.
I've done that a couple of times when I've been in positions where I had to do a long script in a short period of time and there was no possibility of a teleprompter. I had the advantage of I recorded my own pace and I knew what I needed in terms of pauses and things like that. So to listen to a medical narration or something else where it has to be absolutely accurate, to hear it first and be able to speak it is not that challenging, but for these folks who do it with somebody else and a possible broken speech pattern and are still able to turn that around into a fluid presentation, my hat goes off to them. That must be very difficult.
And that's skilled broadcasters can do it, where they'll just sit there and they'll pair it out something someone's sending into their IFB. Not very often, but they're capable of it. Next question.
Next question comes up from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, and he says, how do you change your slide design and color choice when projecting in a fairly well-lit room?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm just going to take a bit of a step back here and say that the problem really exists if you want to maintain a hybrid type situation, because if you're trying to design slides one way for an in-room experience, how then is that going to translate if you also have a hybrid component, or you have to pivot your audience again? And are you going to kind of burn my eyes off here if you're sending me a bright slide and that's designed for an in-room experience? And the other thing I'm seeing right now is some of these sessions like at CES, you've got some people in a room watching a presentation, and you've got people there taking pictures, photographs of the presentation, and those are ending up online. And I think the messaging that that says the branding of the subject matter they're trying to talk about isn't fantastic. So you may want to also keep in mind the image that maybe may live on if any pictures are taken or a record is made.
Marty.
So the key to viewability is all about contrast. And it's important to remember that projection is an optical system, both the projector and the screen itself. And if you have a room with uncontrollable light or light that is shining off the screen, you're instantly diminishing your contrast ratio. And in that situation, an ambient light projecting screen is the best tool. Hopefully the installation contractor recommended that, in which case it wouldn't be a problem.
Go ahead, George.
So Marty touched on two things, so contrast and projection. First, on larger events, projections will take care of dialing in those projectors. Fortune 500 companies, when they're having their conferences, there's a color palette they choose for a reason, and they try to stick with that over the entire conference, because as soon as you start changing lights, you have large problems. If you're going to change, you want to stick with darker backgrounds, because as soon as you go with lighter backgrounds, obviously you're going to be competing with ballroom lights or room lights. So you want to try to stick to something that's predefined before the event, because and it will happen where you have folks saying, well, can you turn on the lights in the room? But as soon as you do that, your slide's going to go out the window.
A lot of times, my slide design has to do with oftentimes whether people want me to deliver the slide deck or not. So if I'm going to deliver a slide deck, I'll typically, I mostly lean on contrast. So a lot of contrast if I'm going to, whether it's a white background or a dark background. If it's going to be a particularly dark room, I tend to use a dark slide because it reduces people's, if white slides will pull people's iris in. It makes it actually harder and less comfortable to look at. So in a dark room, I'll want to use the dark background. When it's bright room, you're kind of in trouble no matter what. Number one is don't have a lot of density. So lots of words on a poorly lit screen creates a lot of headaches for folks that are looking at what they're doing. If I'm delivering the slide deck to someone, like this is going to be that they can take notes on or whatever, then I'll always do it on a white background because they can write on it. And also, if you ever printed a dark slide deck, literally the paper comes out wet because you've used up so much ink in your thing. So as a person who has a lot of people that want the slide deck afterwards, I do a lot on white because of that. But although now that I'm moving more towards dark, just because I think it looks nicer, but it doesn't print as well. And then because I've gotten so austere about my text, I've now gotten to more of I'm going to send you a text document that is it's this idea, but it's a real text document that you can read that's designed, and then I'll give you a presentation that is very austere. Then we don't have to worry about having both, because people always go, well, I'm delivering the deck and it's going to that's why it has to have all these words. I'm like, just give two documents, the one to read and the one to look at. And it's a much more effective way to approach it. Next question.
Jens is up next in Sandpoint, Idaho, and the question is, we noticed that the MV7 using the USB interface and had to be maxed to hit -20. What else could you do to increase your levels?
Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, so I'd try to look at your signal chain and start on one side and work your way to the other side. So starting with the microphone, the first step would be to make sure that you're close to the microphone, right? So there's an exponential benefit to having it as close to the source as possible, right? That could fix your problem there. Working down the chain, you're using a USB for an interface, right? And that might be going directly into Zoom. So maybe there could be something in between that step that helps boost the gain, whether that's Audio Hijack or another software system. And then finally in Zoom or whatever program that you're streaming from or using that USB mic with, there might be some capabilities in there to add some more gain as well.
Yeah, I think that on the Mac, what you'd most likely use is something like Audio Hijack, and on the PC, it's the Voice Meter Banana or Potato or Pineapple or something like that. Next question.
Stephen Bodner, in Colorado Springs says, what's the most entry-level audio mixer that supports OSC and or Companion and Stream Deck?
I think I would say the X32. I don't know of any smaller mixer that will support OSC and Companion. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, the XR18 from Behringer is less expensive.
But does it support OSC?
It does, yes.
Okay, there you go. XR18. Do you know if the XR12 does too, as we keep on seeing how low you can go? So it's the XR18, because there's definitely a different processing between the XR12 and the XR18 that is dramatic.
Yeah, the XR18 is the only one that supports USB multi-channel audio with your computer.
Yeah, it's a big jump up between the 12 and the 18. And the 18 is a great entry-level mixer. Next question.
Gabriel Ung is back from Malaysia with, I'm thinking of keeping my desktop in a separate room. Distance is about 30 feet. What's the best way to run USB-C, display, or Thunderbolt connections to the desktop from my table? Thank you.
I go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, there's a couple options. If you do go with a Thunderbolt dock, like one of the ones that are talked about here regularly, the OWC, you're going to need a long cable, and these are super expensive. So the 16-foot, you said 30 feet, so you're looking at about $369 for the cable plus the dock. Another way to do it over Cat5 is something like the Geffen extender, which will give you the HDMI and USB. So you're going to have to put your Thunderbolt devices back at the computer. So if you don't really need Thunderbolt on the desktop, I would go this route, because this thing's only $399. So you're all in at $399 rather than having to go $399 plus $399. So you'd be in it more like $700 or $800 to go the Thunderbolt at the desk route. So just depends on which route you want to go.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. You could get a lot of this done, with extenders for your simple I/O, and then you probably want to go try and look for optical interconnects, to just help you get the distance, but also just electrically isolate everything also over that distance to save any interference or crosstalk. But when you want to start approaching the Thunderbolt, actually getting Thunderbolt I/O, then you're into the money there, like guys shown.
The industrial solution is IHSE. IHSE. We use those as extenders. Those are modular fiber-based extenders that we use with things like EVS and so on and so forth. But I think that they have a USB-C solution that is available. But that's the heavy-duty version. Next question.
Noah Sargent asked, is Mukhana an available product for purchase or use yet?
It is. You have to just contact me. It's expensive to set up right now. We're working on making it less expensive. It's just that it's a lot of hand crafting to get it up to speed and to manage it, especially on a commercial basis. We loan it out a little bit to folks within this group who want to use it. And, there's some restrictions to that. And also that it's not really a commercial product. Once it's a commercial event, which we do use it for, and we customize it and do a lot of other things for folks. So what you see as Mukhana here is very different than what a lot of our clients will see. We'll redesign the whole front end so it matches there. Sometimes we take stuff out, put stuff in, that type of thing. So there's a lot of customization, but it's not something that is turnkey yet for us. But that's what we're working on pretty hard. And so, but it is available for commercial products, and we use it it's relatively common that we use it for commercial events. Next question.
Jens in Sandpoint, Idaho is back and asks, what would be needed to screen scrape a Zoom meeting, delay it by 2 to 5 minutes, and then send it back into a Zoom breakout room for self-checking audio and video?
2 to 5 minutes is a really long time. So that's what like when it comes to caching video, it becomes a really long time to wait. So we use, we definitely have systems to do that. Evertz makes a system that does that really effectively. We can do it, I think, up to 10 minutes of delay, but that's a $10,000 or $11,000 box that will do that, and we use it for safety delays. But I think that 2 to 5 minutes is a long time to delay. 1, 2, 3 seconds is one thing. Also, if you just stream it to YouTube through AWS, you're going to get a delay of like 30, 40 seconds. So, just sending it somewhere through a couple different pipelines can slow it down to up to a minute. You can also do things like I guess one thing you could do is you could stream it with HLS and then set the segment size to a long segment size and have it save a certain number of segments before, like cache a certain number of segments. Then you would end up 1 or 2 minutes behind. So that might be the easiest way to do it, is to use an HLS and then increase the number of segments cached, and the size of those segments could get you a delay of 1 to 2 minutes in a relatively free manner. It's usually something we try to eliminate, not add to, but it's very common for our HLS streams to be at, the high profile ones to be at a minute of delay. Go ahead, Noah.
You could also stream to YouTube and then literally hit pause and wait till the duration you need it to, and then hit play again. And then obviously you'd have to bring that back into Zoom after that. Yeah,
absolutely. Next question.
Stefan Fischer, Worksburg, Germany, here on the panel, says, what pieces of software and hardware are needed to reproduce 714 sound between a digital source like a movie on a Mac and the XLR-capable active speakers that he might have? I guess the panel would not use some regular hi-fi receivers?
You can. There are a couple hi-fi receivers. There's not very many that will do the XLR outputs. So if you want you can do 714, 916 with a lot of Denon makes some pretty good ones that we've used in the past that will do all of those, but those are typically powered. So those are going to be powered out there. So the 2 raw lines or pins that you're going to send out to those speakers. If you want it to be XLR, which is something that I tend to lean towards, there's not that many AV receivers that are available. Monoprice actually makes one that a lot of us are trying to get a hold of because it's 16. It has 16 outputs in XLR, but right now it's really hard to get, and this may be connected to, I've ordered one like 6 months ago. So it is, and they're like $4,000 or $5,000. So it's an expensive one. There's one other company that I just can't think of at the moment that also starts with an E, I think, that has another one that's like 12 outputs or something like that. So those are there. Now you can, what I'm attempting to do, at least it works in my head so far. But where I'm going with the 714 mix, which is what I'm going to be building here, is just using an X32, but then you need a processor that's going to send that out. So that's building a separate rendering in RMU that will render that out. So it basically will take what it's getting from an Atmos system and then render that out to individual channels. And that's usually a Dell or even a Mac Mini will do that. So, and that's part of, I believe it's still part of the Dolby Studio, package is part of what will convert that from one to the other. And then you can output it from anything that's got if you have a rendering unit, it'll output anything that's got XLR outs, to do that, it'll send that signal because it's calculating the position of the Atmos object to the speakers and it's doing that for you. I think that there may be a way to do some of this, like with Logic and so on and so forth, and you may or may not need the RMU, but I'm not certain. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, it seems like the encoding process, the decoding process to get you into your whatever multi-channel format you're looking to do is the important component. It's that algorithm that encodes it and allows it to be stored or broadcast. It seems like a DSP, an audio digital signal processor that you can design on screen as a drag and drop system would be a natural.
It is. I just don't know of one that does that. I mean, they've all been software based.
Right. They're all software based, but I can't think of any that includes those encoders and decoders.
The 5291 will. I mean, there's different things that will embed it back onto the signal, as discrete channels. So, like for instance, a linear acoustics 5291 will do the conversion from Atmos to discrete channels. And so there's a variety of tools that will do that. In inverse, the ATEM Titans and the elemental appliances will take the discrete channels and then put them back into something that looks like Atmos, so that when it goes out, when it traverses the internet and comes back out to an AVR, it will then be able to go back into channels. It's not, so those are a bunch of different things. But right now, when you're actually working with it, and the person, hopefully at some point, if you see Mickey in After Hours, ask him. He probably knows more about it than I do. I'm putting together the system and we'll be showing it to you all. Mostly my work is dealing with an AVR that's getting an HDMI signal. And so we're generating all of the stuff on one side. I don't have to deal, to be honest, Mickey handles the post for me. so I don't have to deal with it. So me putting this together is something that we're all going to kind of explore together. I know it from a theoretical perspective, and within the next couple of weeks, I'll know it in a very concrete way. So we'll all do that together. Next question.
Next one comes from Rupert McRae here on the panel in Dallas, Texas. How was conversations with Tony Mobley last night?
How did it go? Does anyone have any? No, there's no hands raised. We usually have Tony here on Thursday to talk about it, but we might have to catch Tony on another one. Go ahead, Sky.
I was not able to watch it. I was in the car, but I did looked at YouTube, and all of a sudden there were several of the previous episodes, and I was binge watching the previous episodes and really enjoyed Benjamin and Joshua from Jesse.
Yeah,
amazing.
I have to say that the hard part for me for Tony's show is it's like exactly at the time I can't watch. Like I always have meetings, at 5:00 every day. So it's very hard for me to jump to see it live. Next question
comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, Alex, I really like the concept of a dedicated social desk on a show. If the content of a show is even remotely fissionable, would a dedicated mukhana operator be useful to manage trolls and inappropriate behavior?
For larger events, there's a lot of tools in mukhana and some of the other tools that we use that are specifically designed around trolls and inappropriate behavior. And we don't use as many of them here because we don't have as many of the problems, but we're pretty, a lot of my early Q&A tools processing, really, I learned that the number one thing to do is to manage trolls, and just to keep the conversation safe. And so, for larger events, we can turn on a delay, which we see every question before it goes out. So we can, if we're really worried about it, we can build a team of 10 people that are watching everything coming in and just going yes, 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 no, yes, 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 no, like all of that, so that it never even sees the public. We also have tools internally that allow us to flag things, so people can just if you think something's inappropriate, you can flag it. We can obviously kill the comment, and we can also kill the comment and knock the person out of the event permanently. And so we don't have a lot of ways to recovering that. Like if we kick someone out of an event, I don't really have a lot of tools to bring them back in. So it's a more manual process. And so, but we're more worried about Twitch being able to very quickly remove someone, then very quickly put them back in. So anyway, so I think that there's a lot of things that there, and again, a person can manage that, but we can also put teams into to manage that. We've had up to 20 people managing comments for larger events, and that's not just part of it's filtering, but the other part is also just figuring out who's going to get what. So you might answer some questions via text, you might answer some of them on air, and so and then you might send some to a ticker. Hey, this is a great calling in from, like watching from Montana, like all those things. So those are different things that you may want to do with all those comments, and so sometimes that team can get very large. Next question.
Greg Gibson in Washington, D.C. is up next with a question. Was curious if I am the last to notice that Zoom client has become more Teams-like. You can now add external contacts and message chat within the Zoom app without being in a meeting.
Go ahead, David.
I'm not sure if that's a new thing. I know with my enterprise account, they suppress that app chat. It's not in meeting chat. It's a separate little thing in your central Zoom control panel. Right. The contacts is an addable thing. I think it's always been there.
It's been there for a long time. Kind of not in a good way, in my opinion. But now go, Rupert.
Yeah, exactly. Some of that functionality has been there. Again, it's typically things you see in the home page of the app rather than while you're in a meeting. But this is a good example of where it's important to remember that Zoom, grew out of the enterprise space, and that's a core part of their business is enterprise collaboration. So there's some of this stuff that's existed there before, and more gets added actually all the time. They're particularly going after the chat features, the in-app chat, so the inter-organization chat. I mean, the UCaaS and chat and voice and phone business is a big part of it for them. So it's probably something you're going to see more and more of, I'd say. And like David said, some of those exposures can vary depending on what type of account your client is attached to and whether that account has enterprise policies and features enabled or disabled.
I've never seen anyone actually use the chat. Like it's there. It's a good example also of companies that are trying to do something, trying to break into something and they just haven't quite figured out how to crack that code yet, because there's not a lot of reason to. So it's usually a window that a lot of us just close, like, oh, okay, this is something that they're trying to get us to do. But I think that there are ways to do it, but I don't think they figured those ways out yet. I think it's easier to go to video from chat than chat from video. I think that might be some of the challenge. Go ahead, Rupert.
Just wanted to clarify there. I think the challenge for Zoom is that other chat-based collaboration platforms like Slack, let's say, they're going after the video segment. So right. If Zoom, it's a competitive platform at that point of view, and that presents a challenge for users whether they have to have 5 apps open to do the things that they want to do. So trying to consolidate these things and make it a unified experience, I can see the sense in it. It just does present some challenges in trying to get there.
And there's a lot of advantage to it. I mean, we're working pretty hard right now to get parts of Mukhana into Zoom, because I'm tired of going back and forth between a browser and Zoom. So we're hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll be able to start testing in some of the first attempts at that. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Jens in Sandpoint, Idaho. What's the best way to get a line level signal into an iPhone?
Go ahead, David.
I don't know if it's the best way, but Headset Buddy makes a little attenuated adapter that works pretty good. This one even it gives you the monitoring outs, so pretty good stuff, inexpensive.
Go ahead, Hosmuk.
Yeah, when Clubhouse was launched, I was keen on using my MixPre audio chain to go into the Clubhouse meeting. So Mickey suggested an adapter from Rode, SC6-L. And that's what I use. It's got 2 mic inputs and 1 headset output. So I used to take the stereo out from the MixPre. And you need the special TRS cable from Rode as well to get that audio into the phone.
I go, Rupert.
Quite often what I'll do on an iPhone is come out with a Lightning to USB host adapter that's powered also. And then I can plug, a variety of interfaces, whether they be audio or anything else, into that. And so long as that adapter's powered, you keep everything powered. And really, a lot of this will actually come down to what app you're trying to use on the iPhone and whether it's going to recognize a particular device. You can use an interface which is class compliant and might give you the I/O, but at the end of the day, the app needs to recognize it also.
Since we're saying best, we didn't put best for a certain price. A Lightning to USB, as Rupert stated there, and then what we've used in the past is not a mix pre, but a USB pre 2, which is a hardware interface. It costs more than the mix pre. It's got all dip switches, and it's got a built-in limiter, and it'll take both mic and line level in. And give you a lot of other little bits of control. So it's, in my opinion, the best I/O that you can get for the, for a computer still. After all this, just because it has one mission, it does one thing, to get in and out. So that's the best way to do it. Another way to do it relatively effectively, which isn't nearly as expensive, depending on your hardware, is to get into applications that can't see an external device like Clubhouse. The thing that I found to be the most effective is the Avio Bluetooth to Dante. So basically, you have it's a power over Ethernet Dante hub, and usually it's sitting around here, but I don't think I have it right in front of me. And it basically Ethernet in, and then it looks like a Bluetooth headset to the phone, and then the phone will just see it there. And so that's if you're trying to get into something that can't necessarily see an external device, that will just look like a headset to it. And that's how we've gotten good audio into Clubhouse. And by the way, if you're wondering, if you join a Clubhouse conversation with this mic and this setup and into through Bluetooth, the first question everyone's going to ask is how you're doing that, because it's definitely sounds different than everything else on Clubhouse. Go ahead, Hasmukh.
Yeah, it was a bad buy. I used it twice with the frenzy of Clubhouse, and I haven't been on Clubhouse for months. I don't need that adapter anymore. Just a reflection on Clubhouse.
Again, the only thing that I haven't used Clubhouse in a long time either. But what I will say is that having that Bluetooth around, I have used it a couple other times where I needed to have headphone audio in to another device. It's been really useful to just bypass. So a lot of tools try to keep you from putting an external audio source into it. And so sometimes it's easier to just do it and have it look like a headphone. Next question.
Next one comes from Nigel DeSau in Austin, Texas, here on the panel. You mentioned that the XR18, and I have seen people use it with an X-Touch controller. I know that you can also use an iPad. Which would you prefer?
Sorry, go ahead, and Marty.
So I have an XR18 here, and I'm using the X-Touch. I have an X-Touch here. I have the desktop control software open on my computer, and I could bring it up on a mobile device like my phone or a tablet. Which one I would use depends on what I'm actually doing with it. If I'm just using it as an audio interface for meetings like we're doing here, I just use the desktop software because once it's set, I don't really need to play with it. And it's easy enough for me to access it with my mouse while I'm looking at the rest of my screens. If I'm mixing music or doing any kind of recording where it's more handy to have tactile touch on faders and such, I'd certainly use the X-Touch. If I need to be walking around or mobile, then I would use my mobile device.
Go ahead, Noah.
They all work well.
Yeah, I really love the flexibility of an iPad, but the reality for me is that tactile feedback of physical faders, knobs, those kind of things. Until that's introduced to some sort of iPad-like device, which I don't think we're there, I think tactile is still the way to go, in my humble opinion.
To Marty's point, I have seen some of our engineers, be able to sit in the audience with an iPad and sit there and, sit where the audience is going to sit and listen and be able to make adjustments. Not necessarily how they'd run the show, but being able to interact with the device and be able to sit where the audience will actually be has been pretty useful across a couple devices. Next question.
Steve Bodner in Colorado Springs up next, and he said yesterday Jason mentioned that he no longer installs the Elgato software. Can he elaborate as to why one wouldn't install this software?
I go, David.
I can't speak on Jason's behalf. I haven't been using the Stream Deck software. I've used Companion. However, the Nobe Omniscope has a native Stream Deck module, so I might have to take one of these button control surfaces and run that just for Nobe, so you can toggle between different views and stuff like that. So
that's great. Marty?
So I use the Stream Deck software, and I use Companion, and I have a mix of both on my Stream Deck Surface. And what I find is that the Stream Deck integrations with software and stuff are not completely reliable. They don't always work. The Companion integrations seem to be much more reliable.
Rupert?
But there's a basic difference between the two. The Stream Deck software is all about interacting with software on the computer that it's connected to, where Companion can interact with software and with hardware that
Rupert?
is on elsewhere on the network, maybe.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I just wonder whether this is slightly analogous to the Brio. The Brio company, Logitech makes some software for the Brio, and it's if you have nothing else and you know nothing else, then it's something that'll do something for you. But ultimately, you're going to probably use other tools. Whether the Elgato is something like that, is something out of the box to get you going, and then when you grow out of it, you can quickly move to something else.
Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois says, will you identify the pen-shaped lapel pocket clip-on wired mic used when U.S. senators speak from the small podium in the U.S. Senate chambers? Comments on how sound needs to be handled in these government venues.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm looking at them. Looks like the old salt shaker type mics we used to use were dynamic mics, and I suspect, don't know, that they're trying to eliminate as many points of failure as possible by having it be a wired connection, by not requiring it to be a condenser, that it's a dynamic mic and that it will work time and time again. Probably take some abuse in the process because they just throw those things on the podium all the time. But I would say a dynamic mic, probably an older style Sony or something like that.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I don't know what that specific one is. I've been in that chamber, and the chamber is echoey to the extreme. I mean, those marble halls in Congress are all very bad for sound. I would suggest that maybe somebody just took a long metal weighted pole and put a capsule. I would probably think about something like a Sony ECM44 that's not super sensitive. And the fact that you're getting it in a lapel pocket means you're going to be 7 or 8 inches away from the mouth, and that's going to use the inverse square law to suppress some of that substantial background thing. They may have a far more sophisticated system behind that. They certainly have the resources to do that. But I think it's mostly that using physics to get the mic close and then use a good capsule. You probably should be able to recreate that.
Yeah, I don't know what I haven't seen, I'm not familiar with the Senate one. In the House of Representatives, they have podium mics with a long neck and a head, and that's using a Sheps mic. It's actually 2 of them that they had for quite some time. So it's, and they're pretty high quality. Next question.
Ken English is up next from Buffalo, New York. And Ken says, what do you suggest for earphones, wired or wireless, and in or over the ear? Is there a difference between earphones for editing and those for participating in something like office hours?
I go with Rupert.
I can tell you what I do. I don't use anything for wireless at all. It's just not worth, to me, it's not worth the latency and the trouble with battery life and things like that. And the pairing, it's just introduced these too many variables. So I don't use anything wireless. I have a pair of headphones to the side, which I will put on and use if I need to listen critically, or I need isolation, or want full range. We're doing something in stereo or music or something like that. But for the rest of the time, whether it's in office hours or meetings for the kind of rest of the day, I wear this thing, single kind of IFB style in-ear earpiece. It's an open ear one, so I'm not getting any isolation here. That enables me to keep full spatial awareness, which I value for long term. And I have it that stays basically on me all day, and I have it on a long cord clipped to my belt with a carabiner here, and that enables me to just get up and walk around the room without unplugging or doing anything else like that. But I think staying wired is essential.
Go ahead, Noah.
So the true answer to your question is there's going to be headphones for each purpose that you have in each use case, right? So my go-to are my in-ears, like they're custom molded to my ears and they fit really, really well. They also take away sound, right? They're basically like earplugs plus, high quality hearing. So if I had to choose one, that would be my go-to because they fit me perfectly and they fit most scenarios. As far as like wired or wireless, the reliability of wired is always great if you're stationary, but the flexibility of wireless, I still use some Bluetooth headphones, which are great too. And then over the ear cans are just more comfortable if you're listening to, 5, 6, 8 hour plus sessions.
Go ahead, Bill.
Everybody's covered most of the big things. I would just add that, yes, I use different headphones for different things. For conversation where I'm not concerned about the quality of the audio, but I want to make sure intelligibility is 100%. I, like many people here, use these little security earphones or something that's really stealthy and just sits in your ear, but reproduces human speech incredibly well, which is also why when I'm doing any kind of video production or something like that that involves dialogue, I usually use the ubiquitous Sony 7506 headphones because they have a bit of a presence peak right around human speech. So if I get some sibilance or something, I'm going to pick that up better than if I was using a set of headphones that are known to be completely accurate across the spectrum. I might use those if I was looking for mixing music and or something like a movie where the background has to be as balanced as everything else. But that just means that there's a different set of monitoring criteria for every use case, and you buy the product or use the product that is right for that use case.
Yeah, I prefer people to use in-ear if they're going to be on the air. So that's all I'll say is, but over the ear is what I usually edit in to make sure that I, as everybody else said, is something that we can hear everything in a more natural state. Next question.
Next question comes up from Alex 4D in London. He says, Larry Jordan compared the speed of Apple Motion 5 exports between a 2017 iMac and a 2021 M1 Pro MacBook Pro. Why was the Intel Mac at least 48% faster? And he's got the link to that.
I'll go ahead, Jesse.
If you look at the specs on the Intel computer, you'll see that there's 8 more gigabytes of RAM and also a dedicated video card, and that will make a huge difference in your rendering time. Also, the M1 chip is a desktop ecosystem that's in its infancy, so expect to see better performance as software and hardware get better integrated over time.
Yeah, specifically what he was asking for is 3D software requires more, it lends itself less to any kind of parallel processes, and so that's going to put the chip at a disadvantage. And so that's probably the primary thing with all the 3D scenes that he was putting into that's not going to be something that the M1 necessarily handles as well as other chips that might have a more powerful core. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis comes up next, and Tobias says, with Office Hours 2.0 going for a more broadcast feel, will we still welcome questions about improving office hours, after hours, community support, and ruthless reviews?
In general, that's going to be more of an after hours and Sunday thing. So we will push a lot of those, a lot of the ruthless reviews. We may do occasionally, but we'll probably do less of it and do it more in after hours as well, or before the show. And then also we will, so mostly a lot of inside baseball will slowly fade away from the office hours. And really that's going to be something that we do on Sundays. It's something that we do in after hours, but probably less on the broadcast. Next question.
Next one comes from Clive Kitchener, I believe, in Souk, British Columbia, Canada. He says, good morning. Wondering if the racing special of yesterday will be posted or was it a one and done? Great interview. Bit of a shame if it disappears.
It disappearing was part of the reason it was great. so it's a really sensitive thing for us to bring on folks that are in production, like in large scale productions, and talk to us about what they were doing. And so we really, that was a lot of back and forth and a lot of processing to get, that was an experiment on both sides to see if that was a viable thing. So it's actually important that we don't repost it or talk about it too much on air. And also that we don't try to record it later. Like there's a tendency to say, well, if they're not recording, I'm going to try to record it. It's pretty important that you don't. So, like some things just have to be in the moment that they're there. And we'll try to, if you see kind of mysterious things showing up as a on our schedule, it usually means that it's going to be good. So, but we can't record and publish everything. Next question.
Georgie Kennedy Jr. here in the panel from Washington, D.C. Why are the Blackmagic Design ATEM Television Studio HD and ATEM Television Studio Pro 4K live production switchers back-ordered 2 to 4 weeks? Is something new on the way? And he goes,
Go ahead, Noah.
I would like to blame chip shortages more so than product updates. I think we've all been waiting a while on this, and every time this comes up, I love to jump on it and talk about it. I did a 20-minute video on YouTube, 8 months ago, talking about what those updates could be. But I see the ATEM Mini as like children, the 2 switchers that you mentioned as like parents, and then the grandparents are like the 2ME, 4ME, and such. So I think the grandparents get updated first. You're talking about the parent generation, which I think has a little bit of legs left on it. And then obviously the ATEM Minis are newer.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
I know it was really it was a toss of question out there. It is available from Guy and Autorama. This is B&H, but I see a lot more folks are starting to buy these switches. Obviously, because nothing is in the chain and folks want to use SDI, this is the easiest way to go. A lot of folks are also using the ISOs, but again, like Alex always says, once you start trying to build out these systems with the ATEM Mini ISO and put SDI into it, you induce a lot of latency. So it's a mix of a lot of things going on, and hopefully Blackmagic, I know it's a chip shortage, and hopefully we see something new, because folks are kind of spending money they don't want to spend right now on building out these hybrid devices.
Yeah, Rupert.
Well, exactly. It's probably some element of demand there. A lot of people are re-engineering their workflows and trying to put new systems together. So just whatever's on the shelf is going to be in demand, I think.
Yeah, and I think they're probably not building them in high. They're probably not under high demand. So if they get a surge, they're not building that many more. I think that they probably are very close to end of life either way, and so they're probably not building any more than they need. So it may be almost on demand at this point. Next question.
George is right back with another one, and this time he says, did anyone watch Don't Look Up on Netflix? And if so, any thoughts, particularly on the end credit design?
Go ahead, George.
I would love to see more of this discussion, maybe in after hours, Alex. Because I know colors are very important, and I see they were using a lot of fluorescence, and I know sometimes that could create issues. So I will, it's pretty cool to see it being mixed up, and I would love to see more discussion later on. I mean, if we could cover that particular end credit in an after-hour session.
Yeah, I think having sessions talking about credits would be a lot of fun. There's a lot opening credits and end credits is a really great source of creativity. Go ahead, Sky, real quick. Next question.
Next question comes from Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany, and he says, how do the focal length and the distance to the object affect the picture? Some objects seem like they're behind a magnifying glass.
Go ahead, Noah.
So what you're ultimately talking about is depth of field, and I'll try to compress this, but there are 3 things that make up depth of field. The image sensor size, right? So the larger the sensor, the better depth of field you'll have, or the more compression or
less
differences.
Depth of field.
Thank you. Less depth of field. Your focal length is the second one. So as you have a longer focal length, that also compresses your depth of field. And then finally, the distance between your subject and the background, right? You want to create more separation, more distance to help with that as well.
An aperture, so your aperture size will be the other one that affects the that depth of field. But yeah, so I think that's those are the things. And zooming in, of course, is going to give you a shorter depth, the appearance of a shorter depth of field, because there's just more distance covered in what you have there. Next question.
Georgie Kennedy is back right again for another one. At $295 is the ATEM Mini too costly as a matrix switcher attached to a monitor?
Go ahead, George, and we're going to move through these. We are going to go just a little over, and then we'll jump into the main subject. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I mentioned before that I had one of the ATMs on my prompter, and I still have it on there. It helps me to switch between sources. I'm thinking about putting a second one on my 27-inch because it's so irritating to have to push those buttons to try to toggle to each individual input for the 4 sources I have coming into it. I have 3 of them, so I'm thinking I don't use them that much. Is it too costly to actually implement that throughout your space?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I just think, I guess it depends on how many, but they're so versatile that if you're to modularize your system, at least you know that if you pull everything apart and reconfigure it a different way, then you have some options if you need to repurpose that equipment.
yeah, I find them very useful as glue, to just because you can put stills in them, you can grab different sources, you can remote control them. It's pretty useful. Last question for the first hour.
Steve Bodner in Colorado Springs gets the honor, looking at the XR18 based on his the reply to my earlier question. On the listed features, is revolutionary Dugan-style auto mixing, is that as good as the actual Dugan hardware and software?
That was a very expensive back and forth between Behringer and Dan Dugan over the use of his name, because when they first did it, they basically recreated what he was doing. I mean, his algorithm's been out for a long time. I think that the patents have passed, and so they thought. But the problem is that nobody wants to use anything that doesn't say Dugan on it. Like, everyone's so conditioned in our industry, and Dan is such a leader in the industry as far as, so no one wants to use something that doesn't say Dugan on it. And so they put out something that said Dugan style, and that was using his name without asking Dan was not a good idea. And so I think that they finally it hung everything up on the XR18 and some of the other Behringer products for a little while, and then popped back out. I think it's probably very close to a Dugan exterior hardware. I think you'll find that you have more. It's Dugan style. I don't think it has all the bells and whistles that a standard Dugan auto mix will have. So you won't have the fine controls that you need. Will it get you, for someone using an XR18 for basic stuff that they're doing, will it get them mostly where they need to go? Probably, but you're not going to have some of the fine controls that you would have with a full Dugan implementation, which is available in the XR30 or in the X32. That's one step up over the XR18. All right. We are now going to change subjects to talking about our second hours again. And so really all week we're talking about these ideas of what are we going to do throughout the year, throughout the next quarter, et cetera, and kind of discuss ideas. And so if you have ideas of things you'd like us to talk about on Thursdays, the idea that, at least my concept, and we've kind of done this for the last year and a half, but I think that we're going to get more focused on it, is really looking at not business models for creatives. That's something that we'll talk about on Mondays, not how-tos for creatives. That's something we'll talk about on Fridays, but really talking to creatives. So people who are creating, have a YouTube channel they can be someone who's an artist that can draw, can model, can, all those things are possibly about, but really music is another one, acting, all those things are things that we want to look at to just talk about their process. I think that one of the things that's really important for us as folks that are managing this on a technical aspect is to see how the artist comes to that process and how they approach it and how they think about it. I think is something that we want to, and just understanding kind of general art. I mean, we may bring someone in and talk about topography so that we understand what that actually is. I mean, that could be a mixture of, but it'd be someone who's actually building the topography. The how to do it would be something that we'd do the next day. Maybe we even tie those things together someday. So anyway, looking for ideas around folks from all of you over the kinds of things that you'd like to cover from an art perspective in our sessions. Now let's go ahead and jump to the first comment and question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis has the first one, and he says, would clergy and houses of worship fit best within the artist's second hours? They're using music, tech, arts, and conversation to create community and deliver a message.
Yes, I'm still working on the religion part. There's a lot of us that are working in either just Sundays on House of Worship or working with different churches and different backgrounds. And it's a tricky business to bring someone on. And so I think that we are interested in that, but I haven't quite figured out how to do it yet without it kind of leaning into something that starts to become more difficult for us to manage. So I definitely like the idea, and I do think that we could talk about it from a artistry background and so on and so forth. But it's really hard to do well. And again, I think that Marty and Leo do a really good job on Thursdays. It's Thursday, right? Are you doing it today, Marty? Hope I can't hear you.
Yes. Sorry.
What time is that again?
There's a hybrid ministry show at 7 p.m. Eastern time.
7 p.m., 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I think we have a link to that at the bottom of our email out there. So I think that they cover it really well. And I think that we might be able to do a roundtable if we brought them in. If we brought Marty and Leo and Tobias and other folks in to talk about it in general. But I'm not sure whether that would be necessarily a Thursday show as much as a Friday show or something else of talking about the nuts and bolts of what that takes. But I think from a creative perspective, it would be complicated, and I'm just very sensitive to the very heterogeneous mix of our user base. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, that we talk a lot about on both Leo's show and my show. We talk a lot about camera presence and the difference between clergy in front of a crowd of people on a pulpit and presenting themselves on camera and the different ways that you want to move and pay attention to, and it's different for a lot of people. A lot of clergy just aren't trained that way. They don't think that way, and could use a lot of help.
And again, I think that would be a technical thing that we might talk about on a Friday. The thing that I think that would be interesting, and if we could figure it out, a way to condense it is how does a specific person, and I think that a lot of what I'm trying to lean towards for Thursdays is really a specific artist on how they approach, and an artist could be someone who's speaking in front of a lot of people. How do they approach what they do? Like how do they approach how they interact with the camera, with the audience, that type of thing. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I was just going to vote up the thought of having that other show, like you said, the hybrid ministry show. I think I've heard that once before, but I think that's something like, I don't know if we have a regular calendar or schedule, so that way it's promoted more in that sense of like, a place where people can go and talk about that, without offending people or what have you.
Yep. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, just in terms of the techniques of this, I'm just wondering if public speaking in general would be a broader category that would incorporate all of these things, speaking to convince and speaking, those kind of things, as opposed to narrowing it into a worship circumstance. I mean, I'm interested in things like if you're typesetting, in Hebrew and it all works differently. Are those things different? Are there specific slices of this that work differently?
And again, I think for Thursdays, what I'm trying to look at specifically is talking to the actual artists that are doing this, not a technical discussion. The technical discussion, like typefaces, and not necessarily, but talking to a very established typographer about how they, or someone that works at a foundry about how they approach their art, or looking at the history of typography or something like that. I think is a Thursday session talking about how to do it. As soon as we get into the how, then I think it moves to Friday, as far as like approaching from a technical, nuts and bolts. And that's just how I'm trying to, in the sense of trying to figure out how to, build boxes for all of these things. Let's go to the next question.
John Snyder comes up next. Topic idea, typeface design.
Yeah. And I think that's a good one where I think that there's a Friday session of talking about the actual nuts and bolts of typeface, but there's also a creative discussion. I have a friend that has written a book on, for instance, typeface or font or alphabets from Africa, which might be an interesting, discussion of just, an hour of someone who really studies like how all these actually work, and how and where they came from and what the similarities are and where you can see those things. And so that might be something that we can do. Next, go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to note that having been an idiot in typeface design early in my career and then working around designers, there is probably no deeper subject in the world for discussion than typeface design, because I've had people spend 4 hours debating the L's in 2 typefaces that I can't tell the difference in, but they know 1,000 differences.
Well, and I think, again, that there is a discussion, a technical and specific discussion that happens on a Friday where we bring just folks that design these things, but talking to a designer who's well known that does typefaces would be interesting about how they got into it. What are they doing? Talking about the design of typefaces and how they get put together and the things that are important, I think would be probably find its way on a Friday. Go ahead, Noah.
I just wanted to mention Chris Doe, who was a graphics designer who moved into teaching as well. I don't know if anybody knows his name, but should look him up on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Chris Doe and the Future.
Yeah. And then David.
Yep. 2 things. There's the film Helvetica, which goes into the
so great.
It's a great film. And then there's a gentleman who used to work over there who's designed that font, which is a serif font. It has its own name, Lou Dorfsman. And this is a really good book on his whole design theory and process and stuff.
Now, do you think do you think he'd be available? You don't know.
I'll see what I can muster up. I don't know.
Yeah,
that'd be cool.
What we can do there. Yeah. Next question.
Next one comes from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. He says, Casey Neistat, Peter McKinnon, and others are vloggers with great applied technical knowledge, creativity, do-it-yourself spirit, and a cool nerdiness. Would love to have them here.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Those are all great guys. I think the challenge is, inviting guests like that is not everybody is going to be very familiar with the type of audience they've got here immediately. It takes time to kind of orientate, a guest to who they may be speaking to or the format, and it's possible, but it just may take some work to prep that kind of guest.
Yeah, the with the YouTube personalities, I've actually done some shows with Casey. Mr. Neistat, and you just don't know what you're gonna, you don't know what they've decided they're gonna use your show for. so anyway, I think that's always the challenge, for that process. I think that one that I am trying to kind of, we're trying to kind of put it out there to see if we can get is Destin Sandlin, who's does Smarter Every Day, which is, I think that like talking about his approach to that process would be really fun. I've gotten to work with him in the past too, and he's a really great guy. So it's just to be really fun to have him on. He really thinks through a lot of those processes, and the greens would be good, and a couple other folks that we've worked with in the past. So we're working on that. Next question.
Sky Gleason in Seattle here in the panel. What art would people like to experience on Thursday? Poetry, painting, type design, architecture, live music performance, acting, mime?
Go ahead, Rupert.
In office hours, I think we've done some, great work all over the place, but, we've done the remote band stuff and some really good work with audio and music even. And I think it would just be quite good fun if we're going to get into the artist and type route, right, to have some really cool examples of just really great image quality in Zoom. So anything else that, we've done talking heads really well, but anything else where we can, demonstrate the quality that can be delivered through Zoom, I think would be a great opportunity.
Yeah, Ari.
That was a bit of a spontaneous hand raise, just to say that I used to do intuitive painting for about 2 years, and lately, due to office hours, I've been thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to paint again and set that up as a stream?
That'd be fun.
Maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah. Noah?
Yeah, I wanted to mention something similar. My wife did some streaming with the Girl Scouts, and so she taught them some basics of shading and coloring with oil painting. Right. So something like that could be really cool too.
Yeah, and I think again that's where I'm trying to figure out where Fridays come, where we do nuts and bolts, because nuts and bolts can be anything. It can be everything from shipping to like how to draw. But then Thursdays, what I'm hoping is that we find artists that are kind of are not so much showing us how they do it, but really showing us what they do and talking about that. And they may do some of it. I have a friend who's going to probably come on that is a really good really good artist. Does a concept for big films. And I think that for me, it's not so much, he can definitely show us how he approaches it, and he does teach drawing a little bit here and there. But I think that it's fun to watch him just express that and talk about the creative process and everything else. And so I think it's a really fine line between the how and the why, but we'll keep on trying to figure that out. Go ahead, next question.
Jason Panks is up next from Nashville, Tennessee, and he says maybe have a music artist doing virtual events share their experience.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think seeing examples and hearing stories is always interesting. I think in this area there are people out there doing it and trying it all kinds of different ways, probably with a range of different success levels. If we are able to speak to some of those folks, it would be interesting to see some examples of some really successful examples, and it would also be interesting to see where some other people are struggling with it and where where they can be helped.
And again, I think that this gets back into that Thursday Friday thing, where what we've done in the past is really found the artists talking about how they're doing virtual events would probably live in Friday. Artists talking about them, like their creative process and what they created. So we had, everyone from Brian Vander Ark from the Verve Pipe, and Peter Hellman, and Daria Musk, and even Elmo, my neighbor, talking about grandma got run over by a reindeer last year. But the conversation was more about their experience, and their path, not so much how they do these events, but really, how they got to where they are. And so I think that's what on Thursdays, what I'm trying to find our way to, as opposed to any kind of technique. As soon as we start thinking technique, I'm trying to think about Fridays for those things. Next question.
Noah Sargent says techniques behind circular breathing.
And again, Friday maybe, or after hours. But I think that having a didgeridoo player or a bagpipe player, both of which I like to listen to a lot, would be great. To talk about what they do, or that type of thing. Next question.
Noah Sargent is done, so we're moving on to the second Noah Sargent. This one says guest suggestion: Tested and the Adam Savage's team.
Yeah, and I think that this is a good one where Adam, he would be fun. Like it'd be a lot of energy. And it bounces around a lot. But him talking about his process and how he gets there, and again, I think that is someone who we can again talk about his work product, and about what he's gotten to and how he approaches it. Another person that comes to mind when you think about those kinds of things, if we somehow get to a point where we can invite people like Alton Brown, it'd be a lot of fun to hear his story. So we'll see what we can do there. Next question.
Ooh, this is exciting for me. Andy Coluccio says, how about some streaming theater artists? I think this group would love talking to Jared Mezzochi and folks like Eamon Farrell, Ashley Tata, and Ryan Hallstoppel have really inspired a lot of the remote production technologies out there.
100%. I think they're talking, again, not necessarily how they did the technology. They can talk a little bit about that, but really just their approach and what they were thinking and looking at the kind of work product they did. Yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, I think if Andy has some stories or some contacts in that area, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so let's definitely figure that out. Next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. Up next, would there be value in having someone talk to us about storytelling, perhaps in the context of crafting presentations and events?
Yeah, and I think that those are, again, this is where we're going to kind of find places that sit, like the actual like structure of it might be something that is on a Friday talking about technique. But I think that talking about storytelling in the process of coming up with stories and thinking about them and, and researching them and finding storytellers that can come and talk about those things, I think would be really interesting. And that could be a book writer. That could be, a lot of different things there. And again, I'm definitely looking for authors, but it won't be just like, like I would love to get an author like Michael Pollan on to talk about how he approaches his books, but it's not so much like how do you structure a book. It's more of like how do you think up the ideas and work on that. Go ahead, Rupert.
I was just wondering, in the context of storytelling, how we would balance the, inviting a guest, asking them to tell a story when we're very heavily Q&A based. So where is that balance?
I don't think it'd be so much them telling a story, but them talking about the storytelling process. So we'd ask them a lot of questions because there's I think we mentioned it yesterday. I was talking to someone who has to write these weekly for shows, and they were just like, for a movie, like, and they write films that are, and they were very like methodical, like this is what you have to do. But thinking through that, like, how do they come up with that? Like, I'd love to bring on, for instance, when you talk about storytelling, like Pixar is probably the most ruthless group of storytellers I've ever, so I've never been in one of the meetings, but I've heard about them for years, of that they just pick apart every scene and every word and every statement and there's a group of people that are constantly attacking it, to try to get just the right words and just the right scenes and just the right, and that cauldron is what produces these movies that a lot of us want to go see. Is they refine it and work on it, and sometimes the story lasts for years. The story, meetings every week for years to get every last scene just the way they want it. Next question.
Alex Goldner in London is up next. He says logo design. Ryan Hughes has created a bunch of logos for comics. He's written a book on the subject, and he has a link there for it.
Yeah, no, I think talking to a logo designer about their approach and how they think about weight and everything else. Again, this is a Thursday, Friday thing, but I think that this is definitely something that would make sense. Next question.
Next one comes from Chris Weidner in Lafayette, Indiana. He says, would talking about how presenters pick their platform and workflow be a Thursday discussion?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think it would be an interesting discussion. I would be most interested in hearing from the artists who picked a platform on which they were being successful on. I think that would be the most interesting discussion. I'm sure there's a lot of other cases which may be less so interesting.
Yeah. No, I think definitely finding out what's working and not working in those areas would make a big difference. Next question.
Todd Rains in Allen, Texas, up next. If you are producing shows on a particular art, the director will need to have an intimate knowledge of the process in order to switch the cameras. This is why I switch my own camera as a wood turner.
Well, I think that we need to bring Todd on. So just let you know, like, this is a good example of Todd. We'll talk. Ping me in after. We'll get you scheduled soon enough. I think you're definitely a good. Because again, I think that this is beyond the technique of things, but really on the technical, but really like, how do you approach this, and how did you get into doing streaming, wood turning, and those types of things? And so we'd love to have you on as a guest to talk to us about like how you got into that. And we've had a couple people that have been kind of in the community, and we just go, oh, let's actually have them, talk to that thing. Go ahead, Rupert.
2 words: Belfast method.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, I think to his point, I think the problem is knowing what he wants to show, and I think, and that's one of the reasons I really like having an ATEM on my desk, is that I can sit there and decide what I'm going to show you. I'm not waiting for someone to figure that out. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I wonder if there's a new kind of hosting that's going to incorporate some more cues like that. A presenter doing wood turning could say, well, let's look next to cameras 2 and cameras 4, and I will explain to you. And that gives the switcher just enough time to get to where they need to go without making them do it themselves in their flow. It just may be skills that are learned.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, or also just working out a proper run of shows so that it's a predictable thing where you kind of know where you're going, rather than the organic kind of flow.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that having a discussion with artists about how they approach that and how they look at it, I think that would be great. Next question.
Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia says, David Gray from Game Storming, and he's got the link there. Several people I know have taken their workshops and love their interactive approach.
Yeah, and again, I think this is something that is right between Thursday and Friday, but I think on Thursday, on the side of Thursday, which is talking to people about creating events that are creating lots of events, and what's working for them, what's not working for them, what are the challenges, how do they approach it, I think would be great. Next question.
Roscoe Jones from the panel here in Bray, California says, I work daily with INCO White from Apollo 13. Would a working actor be of interest?
Oh yeah. And we have a couple actors that have been swirling about that we've talked to about being on the show, and I think that bringing actors on to talk about their process would be great. So I think we should definitely that'd be great. We'd love to bring them on. Next question.
Alex Forty Goldner in London says, Metro Map Design, Mark Ovenden and Maxwell J. Roberts have written books on this subject, and he's got a link there, underground maps kind of stuff.
I think it'd be fun to, I really think there is, again, the artwork of doing that, of how do you approach it, and what colors do they use, and how do they think about that art, I think would be definitely interesting. Absolutely. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, is up next from Bray, California, with would a working director be of interest? I have former students and friends who do that.
Yeah. No, I think talking to directors would be great. It's just a matter of making sure that we, in the grand scheme of things, we just want to make sure working directors, and we just want to make sure people know who they are or have seen something that they've done. It doesn't always have to be that way, but I think that we want to think through that. But I think, yeah, that'd be great. Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle makes this note. If a member of the Office Hours community has a connection to someone famous, that would make a great second hour Thursday guest. How would they best pitch Office Hours as a great platform worthy of their appearance?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I think just before one gets into that kind of conversation, it takes some consideration in terms of, is it going to be a long conversation trying to explain the format? Is it something they're going to appreciate and ultimately maybe connect with? And there are some spontaneous cases where it works well, but the good time is when it can align with a story. I mean, if there's something going on and we just happen to know somebody in it and it can work well, and the logistics can be handled. I mean, do they have the kit? Can we get them a kit? Do we need to send all the logistics, because you don't want to mess up the timing, and either suggest it too soon and then lose the opportunity, or not find the right time.
Yeah, I think that one of the things we want to do is try to build, again, in Office Hours 2.0, for someone who, part of making that look more like a show, and so it's something that's easier for creatives to understand, like what we're doing, and some of them may be open to it no matter what, but and then I would refer to other shows that we think might be a good example of what theirs would look like. I think is part of the challenge there. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, what would you think of bringing in people from associated industries like the space industry to see what lessons we could learn from them in the production world?
I think it's possible. I think that would be probably more of a Friday discussion of just nuts and bolts of how to approach a project from that type of thing. I think it'd be, but bringing on the person who does all the Mars posters, I would totally, how they come up with those 50s looking ones that sit behind Vienna. I was like, I want to know who that is. Next question.
Stefan Fischer, Würzburg, Germany, here on the panel. How about David Sibbett? He is the Grandmaster of Visualization used in the context of organizational development with a lot of dedicated approaches to certain topics.
I think it'd be great. Stefan?
Yeah, I know this guy personally, and he kind of developed the fundamental rules how to bring certain things into visual objects, and he's a funny guy too.
But definitely having someone on like that to talk about how they approach that process, I think would be great. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Noah Sargent comes up next. He says, is anyone interested in a Dungeons and Dragons type show?
I'm always interested in a Dungeons and Dragons type show. I'm just not sure if everybody else would be, but I grew up playing it. So my first applications that I wrote in BASIC were to build non-player characters because they were dying so fast. I was tired of using the dice. So anyway, yeah, it'd be fun. I just don't know how we'd structure it. It'd be fun to talk to some of the folks that worked on the original ones, but I don't know who's around and what's available. Next question.
Alex Goldner comes back again. This time he says, writing popular YouTube videos with Captain Disillusion. And he has a link there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would love to get some type of social, like this is where we start thinking about the trends or the threads that we use. So having a musical artist once a month, having some kind of social media person once a month, having someone that's more in design once a month, and then, like that, and then a wild card or something like that, could be a way for us to kind of approach that process. So I think that could be thinking about different creators that way might be a good way for us to kind of build a set of boxes that we can fit things into. I have to jump. As I said before, I have an unexpected meeting that I have to jump into, but please take copious notes and send me what you come up with here for the last half hour. I should be done with the meeting that I have by 9, but so just you can keep talking a little bit, but I'll probably sometime at 9 I'll probably just blindly open up after hours. All right, see everybody. Thanks.
Fair enough. Thanks, Alex. So let's move on. Go ahead and switch to the next question, and it reads, Leonard French of Lawful Masses might be a cool second hour talking about his show and copyright cases. I'm not familiar with that. Anybody on the panel here today know anything about that and can explain a little bit about what Lawful Masses is? No? Okay, so we'll just have to put it on the list and move on to the next one. Marty Adius in Maryland says stage presence and camera presence for musical performers. That's a big topic. Rupert McRae.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk to the camera presence since we're talking, virtual type interaction. I think it's incredibly important. And so is the audio presence for that matter for especially a musical performance. And I think a lot of folks, whether it be musical or not, are still in the place where they're unhappy. Some folks are uncomfortable with seeing themselves on video, which is, I can appreciate that, but it does lead to the fact that they have they're completely unaware of what they are displaying to their audience. They don't know whether they're off camera or or on camera or not, and that presents a challenge. So there's some coaching there that can be done. And for audio, also I think a lot of these folks have probably never heard themselves or what they sound like trying to do a performance over Zoom or online or whatever it is. So some coaching there, I think, would be really good.
Marty.
Yeah, so I'm working with a local organization, a nonprofit who wants to do a lot of wants to offer artist development and business development for musical artists in this area, of which we have quite a large community. And when you watch artists who are up and coming on a club stage, they don't often have a very good stage presence. They may play really well, but they just stand there and play, and they don't really sell the performance, right? And then translating that onto a video camera would be even really less interesting than watching them in person. So working with up-and-coming artists on their stage presence, their camera presence, and really selling what they're doing is a skill, is a development thing that would be really interesting. And we could do, I don't know if the technical part of the how-to would be really interesting, but talking with people who work with artists to do that kind of development could be very interesting.
Absolutely. Noah Sargent's next. Now Rupert McRae has a follow-up. Go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I was searching for stuff just for fun. Jason Alexander popped up on YouTube, and I watched a workshop that he did a few years ago. But I know an educator, Bob Hess, who's a friend of mine, who taught at my alma mater a class similar to stage presence and camera presence or what have you. So I think there's some building blocks that are already there, and it's the thought of like mixing the education with what we do in office hours. But then the other thought would be around workshopping, and then having stuff specific to performers, and what that could look like or looks like. But yeah, education proponents are in there as well.
Rupert, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back on camera presence. Really, what it's about is connecting with your audience. And we talked a little bit yesterday in office hours about eye contact, and I think that should be not overlooked in this discussion. Helping those artists connect eye contact with their audience, through teleprompters or through whatever else. It's one thing for them to train them to look at the camera, but even better to have them be able to see the audience and let the audience see that they are looking at them.
I do think there's some pragmatic confusions out there. Like I half the time say stage right and half the time say camera right, assuming that the people on the other side know even what those mean, and I'm not necessarily thinking they do. And then to the point that was just being made, the intimacy of this presentation mode where you've got a camera literally right in your face and every emotion kind of shows up. I know actors have talked a lot about moving from the Broadway stage where they have to project big for a theater into a very intimate circumstance like a one-on-one camera where you're literally on the whole time as being different. So I think there are a lot of topics in those two things. Let's move on to the Chris Weidner question next. And that is Leonard French of Lawful Masses. Might be a cool second hour talking about his show in copyright cases. So this must be something to do with the law and copyright. Am I reading that correctly? Copyright
I'm looking at the Lawful Masses website, and what it appears he's doing is analyzing various copyright related lawsuits that are taking place. A lot to do with big tech and Twitter and other socials revoking or
so that makes a lot of sense to me. The question that Alex is going to, I think, have to struggle with is that we all think about that here in America as American law, but of course this is a global forum, so everybody has different jurisdictions, different laws. There are probably things that cut across for our entire audience, but I would just be, he's going to have to figure out how much regulatory and or legal stuff makes sense in an environment where we have people from all over the planet potentially participating in, and the California laws may or may not be relative to it. People may want to learn about it, but it might not be direct. So I think that's a great topic for him to look for, and let's move on to the next one. Alex Forty Golner in London, Freya Holmer. on writing educational videos. Every time I've done anything that has to do with how to write, writing is something everybody does, but it's very hard to do extremely well. David Brady has some thoughts.
Yeah, well, to that point, I was reflecting on years ago that Microsoft had a style guide for just putting together help documentation, and just that sort of thing where you're trying to put together a run book of how to execute a task might be something, although it's not quite the talent and arts thing, but something to consider down the road, especially as the Mobley process or these different processes come and you want to onboard people quickly. To have a run book that's in a consistent written style would be incredibly beneficial, I think.
Yeah, writing is such a big subject because there are things like that technical writing for doing a set of instructions or a algorithmic kind of, this is what you should do first, second, third. Then there's the creative writing of building characters and what kind of things do that. I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in that. And there's so many hybrids in between. What is the difference between writing a good, solid corporate script versus writing a good quality strip for a documentary? Are there different approaches? Are they the same? What do they share? I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in those kind of subjects. So I'm sure Alex will put that on the list to take a look at. Let's move on to Rupert McRae's next question. He says, what would be a good Dropship remote kit for virtual artists? That's going to be interesting. I mean, the artists themselves will have tools that they use. Guy, do you have thoughts about how to put something like that together?
Yeah, there's a Brian Bavito's company, Sight Unseen, that's been working on this, where they've put together some different packages. It keeps evolving, and a couple of people have come up with these. But basically, he's got PC with a way of taking it over remotely and being able to control. This one doesn't seem like it has the lights, or maybe they're off to the side. But he also has lighting and a mic and everything. But it makes it simple so that those that are not very tech savvy are able to just pop it open, plug it in, and ideally plug in a Ethernet cable. His, I believe, also has cellular in it, so they don't even have to plug it into Ethernet. So his site, I'll put a link in the chat.
Okay, David Brady.
I'm going to say that's the holy grail of the past 2 years, and that Sight Unseen thing looks pretty cool. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah, the thing I'm interested in for virtual artists, so what is that artist? If they're a painter working on a large-scale canvas, will a small design for talking head system do justice to their thing? What if you need 2 or 3 camera views to get not only the wide shot of the person working, but to get fine brushstrokes and things like that? And when they say, for virtual artists, that's a pretty broad spectrum. So I'm not sure it certainly should go on the list, and be interesting to see how people's different approaches are to those kind of things. Let's move on. Douglas Carmichael has the next one. How would we draw the line between interviewing an artist or other about their process and getting into the human side, which is better covered on Conversations with Tony Mobley? No one's popped in on this, so I'm going to just say, in part, every time you interview a human being, you have to get a sense of what they're comfortable with releasing out into that interview circumstance and what they're not. We've all seen what I consider bad interviewers who are just looking for the big headline, who try to push people into emotional spaces where they're not comfortable just to get them to draw more eyeballs to big interviews. Here, I'm very proud of the fact that office hours, when we have a guest come in to interview them, we respect their boundaries. We respect what they need to do. We're still trying to illuminate and get as much information out of them, but it's never been a gotcha circumstance. I'm pretty sure Alex is going to be very protective about that, because you can illuminate a lot without trying to push people into places they don't want to go. So I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue. So we've managed to run ourselves out very quickly. Does anybody have any other additional questions or ideas or thoughts about this subject from the panel?
Yeah, Bill, I'll jump in here for a second. I was going to also mention specifically around this last question Douglas just asked. The Hollywood Reporter roundtables is a great thing to look on YouTube, because I feel like that conversation that they have with artists, with directors and actors and actresses or whatnot, is a really good jumping off point for that conversation that happens, in the round, as far as like the digital movement, right, for what we're doing now, where we're all remote. I haven't seen that happen quite the same way yet, but I just wanted to mention that resource because I think that's a powerful thing that is related to Douglas's comment or question.
When you've been watching that, what sorts of things have you seen come up where the interviewer managed to extract more information and get deeper?
Well, I think my favorite part is just to see, like artists admire one another and, feed off of each other, and then to have the questioner lean into that a little bit of like, they'll hear something and then they pull it out of them or unpack it a little bit more, which is very interesting, I think, to just like, oh, let me hear more about that. Let me have you open up about this. What that's the subcontext of what they're saying essentially. But yeah, the admiration between one another, I think, is huge. And then to hear people get excited about other projects, or to say in this moment, like to see you perform, and do something excellent or just like breathtaking. I think the storytelling element is there too, of the sense of like there's undertones and things that we all relate to, right? When something evokes emotion or something evokes a feeling. And I think that's what artistry ultimately is, or one of the things at least, is that we react to it in some way. And so I think that's a powerful thing to see that, but also to admire it in other artists.
Absolutely. I wonder if anybody on the panel has been interviewing somebody, and what are your favorite moments where you've been able to expand this? I mean, in looking for Office Hour 2.0 kinds of things, let's drill down a little bit onto what do you think has compelled you when your eyes really locked into one of these interviews that we've had. What was it about that? Can anybody articulate anything that has really made them engage and want to keep watching to the next thing? Any of the interviews that you've seen in Office Hours that just particularly sparkled for you? I mean, I have a few myself. Well, Guy Cochran has some thoughts, so go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, the one with Steve Brazel, I would say, was a really cool one. That one was one where we just, he had such captivating images where we were able to see, over the years what he's spent years crafting in his skills. And then we just saw it, for our pleasure, just seconds, he would just burn through a bunch of images and be like, in this one, I was using this lens. And so it's kind of the technical plus the emotional plus the kind of background as to, it was hot, sweaty, the mosh pit. So there were concert photos, and it just brought back a lot of memories. And so that one was super captivating. And the other one with Brian Vander Ark was really cool too. When he started singing, there was that one where the hairs on my arms stood up, so I think a couple of those were the special ones.
Absolutely. Those were both extraordinary. Guy Cochran's finished. Let's go to Noah Sargent. He has a return here.
Yeah, some of my favorite moments are just hearing the behind the scenes, like unique moments from the people like who we are right in the industry, whether that's a unique perspective or experience about an event, specifically with Guy, like to hear him explain, how there was a camera that, $25,000 camera almost ripped out of his hands by a musician who was just high beyond belief. And, like those kind of stories are just, they light me up in the sense of like, I can connect to that. And I'm excited by that, but just to hear those experiences that like no one else gets to hear is what excites me.
Okay. Noah, Rupert McRae has some follow-up. Nope, Rupert?
I've just had a couple of examples recently of having guests in particular live environment, and you're trying to find that balance between, letting the conversation go the way it's going, but also respecting boundaries or, what the audience might have been anticipating or what they want, or maybe even what the guest might want to talk about. But I think the incredible component of that is time. If it's a live environment and they've joined you for an allotted time, it's incredibly important to, get that baseline with them ahead of time, find the expectations of whether they can run on a little bit, or if you're trying to hit a deadline, you need to signal. I find it's helpful. I've had some great feedback from being able to, as the session goes on, make sure that you're signaling that to them that they know that you're aware of the time. Hey, we're going to wrap this up soon. Don't let them feel that they're going to crash into their next commitment because you've let the conversation run away with itself.
Yeah, I think all that makes perfect sense. We do have another question in, and for those of you who are watching and part of our producer group, if you have questions you've been thinking about that on this topic today, we're talking about Office Hours 2.0 plans for the future and what sorts of types of programming you want to see come up. make sure you put them in. But this next one comes from Rupert McRae, and he says, as the Grammy Awards have been postponed, could we talk about the future of awards shows? Is there a future? What does everybody think about whether, in the light of what Alex has been talking about, and which I believe in, which is the fact that these big shows are going to be under a lot of stress because of the cost and because of everything else involved with putting those major conventions on. Do we think it's going to break towards downsizing those and more virtualization? Or will people just want to fly to Vegas and have a big party with all their friends for the foreseeable future? Rupert McCary has some thoughts.
I mean, Guy just showed us that example of a little remote kit. And I know last year we saw some much bigger kits that folks were sending out to, studios were sending out to, artists for the big shows last year, as examples of where. But the upside of that was that, that show, each one of those contributors, each artist, one got to see a little bit into their world, their house, their room, and that came into the show. And that, it doesn't suit everybody, of course, but I think there's a bit of, some of those folks would have embraced that and use the opportunity to shine a little bit and come in from their own environment rather than being in a studio in somebody else's highly produced environment.
Marty Adius.
Since there is a proliferation, the award show genre has grown so much. There are so many award shows. I wonder if the big award shows have become less relevant to some of the more regional, smaller shows.
Well, television particularly, which is where most of these grew up. I mean, they're events designed to be broadcast on television. And if they're broadcast on television, that means their real purpose is to gather eyeballs that can be sold to advertisers. And that's how the money process of that works. I agree with you. It's kind of surprising the number of, and I'm not sure if I would call them niche, but the number of award shows that have always felt to me like all they really care about is establishing a link with an audience they can sell. And I'm thinking about some of the, I don't even know what to call them. They're a little more MTV-ish. I tend to watch some of those shows, and there are very few artists that resonate with me because they tend to be young. And I look at the way they produce those shows, and I think, what you're really trying to do is build a massive audience that you can turn around and sell to your advertisers for later. And this is the business of television. You've got to attract eyeballs or things don't work. So I'm not sure more award shows is going to be the same successful strategy it used to be when there was a dearth of channels and we only had a few broadcast channels. Now in the world of, we can click on anything and see any YouTube channel. I think it's just too diffuse for that to, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll turn out that that some sort of awarding turns out to be such a popular thing that people will continue to do it forever. I do note, this is just a personal thing, it is harder and harder for me to find new artists and new content that really resonates with me because of this diffusion. There's so many different kinds of places to go online and get information that I'm not as easy to pick up on trends and artists that I might really enjoy because there's just too many places to look for them. We do have a couple more questions that have come in, so let's move on to Ray Harwood's question is next. How about Rich Mulholland from Prezi? He has a dynamic style and very engaging. Prezi is a fascinating presentation tool. Has anybody here on the panel used Prezi? Has anybody used it lately? I know it went through a huge development cycle. And for those who don't know about it, it is a kind of a sort of a different approach to Keynote or PowerPoint or something like that, in that you start off with a relatively large design graphics, and instead of just flipping pages in slides, which has been the paradigm forever, you can zoom in and zoom out in a slightly less structured way to parts of a diagram with a lot of resolution in the underlying diagram to kind of fly around information and present it to an audience. But I haven't seen it, so I think it would be fascinating. I mean, I always love people who have taken a different approach to something that's been going on for a long time. Noah Sargent has some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I kind of like what I've seen so far from Prezi, and that would be a great guest for sure to have Rich on. So if someone's taking notes to put that on the list, that'd be great.
Absolutely. All right, we got another question in from Roscoe Jones. So let's switch over. And he says, what are your thoughts on single artist interviews versus panels of artists as done by the Hollywood Reporter? Who likes one versus the other? Is anybody? Rupert McRae has the first thoughts.
I think they both have their place. Panel discussions can often be interesting. You're getting different points of view. In our context, finding and scheduling the second hour guests potentially that we're thinking about is a delicate subject, or one that needs to be handled with care. And there's many variables involved in that. And if trying to add in the consideration of who's going to go on what panel with who, and whether that introduces another set of variables, it can lead to a good show. It's just another set of logistics which might be a challenge for the medium future.
That sounds familiar to my experience with assembling panels and things like that. Noah Sargent's next.
I was just going to mention, like, in person, when you're in a conversation, you don't have the same delay that we have like virtually, right? So there's that few milliseconds here and there. And so I think the mukhana system and having the ability to raise hands kind of solves that issue that we have with Zoom conversations where people step on top of each other, and that can be very annoying very quickly. So yeah, in the round, obviously, I think would be the best situation, but we can't necessarily have that from a virtual environment. But to have some sort of system, I think, to help fix the crossover is helpful too.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think picking the panel is an important thing, because if you get 3 or 4 people on a panel and they all kind of feel the same way about the same subject, you just get reiterations. You don't broaden it out. But sometimes if you get 3 people who have different approaches to things, you can expand what you learn about. David Brady.
Right. That's where it would take a seasoned producer to put that all together, because you could either have an in-depth thing with a single subject matter expert, or 3 different ways to slice a fish by 3 different people. And it's a tricky balance, but something that could be done, I think.
And again, we always stay away from the bomb subjects like politics and religion and things like that, simply because we've seen too many of those shows, the talking head shows, where they just build a conflict into the panel. They put on the panel people are going to vehemently disagree with everybody else, and then everybody just spends all their time trying to make points. And I find that incredibly boring. I don't know about everybody else. That's up to you and how you like to consume your media. But I'm hoping that we continue to be the kind of panel and the kind of service where everybody's voices are heard, but everybody stays within the lanes and don't try to just make points. And we do, I think, a fabulous job of that by being controversial. Roscoe Jones is up next. Let's move to the next question. And Roscoe says, is office hours a difficult group to face as an interviewee? Would it be tough for artists? That's an interesting thing. I imagine a lot of people have comments on that. Let's start with Rupert McRae.
I think because the format is so different to many other types of shows, it can be a challenge to explain to some folks. I don't think there's anything unique to artists in that way, though. I find just the same challenge in talking to vendors, technical vendors, trying to tell them that, hey, this isn't the average type of deal where you're going to come on, give a slideshow presentation and then have some Q&A at the end. This is a different format where you're going to preload us with hopefully some content or some news or some subject material, and we're going to ask questions, and that's kind of how it works. Some artists might thrive in that environment. It may not suit others. I don't think there's anything unique about artists in that regard. Maybe some idiosyncrasies here and there, but I think our responsibility, as a show, as a panel, as producers, as whatever the guest is to do our best at helping them produce a piece of work that they can be proud of, and then that leads into that helps the next guest, because we'll have examples that we can point to, and we will have the standard will have been set, and hopefully just get better and better.
Amen to that. Let's move to David Brady.
Yeah, I think with the library of events and interviews that have already been done, those can be released, as Rupert was saying. A lot of the homework is on the pre-production thing, so figuring out the backstory. There's that one show where the guy sits and they eat hot wings at varying intervals. That is an incredible interview show because each wing, as it gets spicier, the questions get deeper, and that guy just digs and digs and digs. So the pre-production is something to really consider and really lean into. And then I think the nature of this community, as I've experienced, is one where the questions are thoughtful and relevant and respectful. So I don't think there's any real reason for anyone to fear the crew. Maybe just the velocity at which the questions come down the pipe can be a little daunting from time to time.
I think one thing that helps us in that is that we all kind of remember our first time on the panel and being just as intimidated as anybody else coming into a group like this and saying, I'm going to uncloak, open my mic, and hope I don't embarrass myself. I remember that feeling from my first day on office hours, and I'm pretty sure that that's a universal experience for everybody coming on the show. And I hope that for those who have watched a long time, you get the feeling that we are very welcoming and we try, because I think a lot of us remember what that was like. Let's move on to the next. Oh, wait a second. We've got David Brady in line and then Rupert McRae again. So David? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. We just got you. So we're moving on to Rupert. Okay. Sorry, the tag. Rupert, you had some more thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, quite often with artists or even vendors, even, we may be dealing with a single guest. And I know we may not want to let some of those things fall into a panel discussion, but I think when guests do bring, a partner or a second guest or a colleague or a coworker or whatever it is, then they at least have the opportunity of sort of bouncing off one another a little bit. A guest can take a breath while they throw a question to somebody else. Just gives them a bit of breathing space, and you're not there out on their own. So if they are artists, if they have somebody else they collaborate with, and we can bring them in too, or somebody that they can bounce off to if they just need to take a breath, I think is helpful.
Absolutely. Let's move to Guy Cochran's question. Guy has the next one. Alex had mentioned that it takes a bit of time to prep a second-hour guest. Is there anything we can do as a team to help? And boy, we certainly can't answer that for Alex, but Noah Thargent has some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Well, I guess as far as like second-hour guests, it would be maybe planning some questions ahead of time, or maybe a quick bio backstory. We can organize that or put it in some sort of document. But more so, second-hour topics, I think of like Guy in the AWS team, right, who put that presentation together of the prep and the time that was spent on that. So maybe just organizing topics or like, branches, I guess you can say, and having producers of some sort help organize and put that together so there's, structure and purpose to those presentations.
Yeah, and you cannot underestimate preparation. You have to have some kind of plan going in if you know your subject at the time. I just remember, because I got thrown into that early in office hours when Elmo was going to come on and do the holiday thing and talk about Grandma Got Run Over with a Reindeer. I wasn't planning on to host that thing, but Alex had things that he had to do and he had technical problems. If he hadn't sent me the notes that he was prepping for that, I think that would have been a runaway disaster. And just the benefit of his preparation with some areas, some backstory, for me to read that for 5 minutes before the show made all the difference in the world. I would never want to go into a situation like that where you have to go live without enough structure and enough ideas so that you know when it falls apart, where can I go? Some of it you can do by instinct, but some of it you just need the preparation. And I think that's critical. Rupert, you had some thoughts?
In terms of tech prep, chances are people that we might have on as guests might likely have been on something else or a guest on something else. They'd likely have materials out there. So I think not researching, but just trying to gauge where they are at technically, in their meeting interaction, in their panel interaction, and trying to estimate how much of a gap there is between how they operate right now and where we would ideally like them to be in terms of camera, equipment, lighting, internet, whatever. Because that one way or another, that gap has to be closed as much as possible.
Yeah, the technical stuff is critical and it's very, very important. But there's also the just understanding the subject and the people involved and having some prep for that, so that what kind of an interviewee am I dealing with here? Are they somewhere where I need to be soft? Are they really technically competent, so that I need to spend more focus on that, and I need to have my game up so at least I understand what they're talking about. Those things all, I think, go into this. Rupert, you had a follow-up?
Yes, I was a guest on something recently, and the interviewer asked me before we went on air, like, quickly, is there anything you want to not talk about? Areas that are off limits. I thought that was just quite a good courtesy.
Yeah, that probably made them feel a lot better. It probably made you feel a lot better with the fact that, there are going to be some boundaries here, and I'm not going to be in that gotcha situation. I don't have to put up the wall and be very, very careful about what I say. So that's useful. Let's move on. We got another question from A. Mitchells here in Washington. He says, speaking as often as we do of talking heads, should we consider trying to invite someone from the talking heads to discuss how they have used newer media technology throughout their careers and project? How about other media tech related artists? Boy, if you can get any of them from the band, if you can get David Byrne in here, I will have my eyes stapled to the screen for that, because I've been a fan of his and the group for such a long time. Anybody have any interesting ideas? David Brady here. We'll start with you.
It would be the same as it ever was.
Absolutely.